Good afternoon. My name is Cindy Arnson. I'm the director of the Latin American program here. And on behalf of the Wilson Center and my colleague Paulo Sotero, director of the Brazil Institute, we're delighted to invite you or to join us for this discussion of President Obama's upcoming trip to Brazil, Chile, and El Salvador. We're delighted to welcome to the center two of the principal, if not the principal architects of U.S. policy in Latin America. Immediately to my left is Dan Restrepo. He is the special assistant to the president and senior director for Western Hemisphere Affairs at the National Security Council. Next to Dan is Arturo Valenzuela, who became Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs in November of 2009. Brief word of bio, and then we'll turn over the floor to our two guests. Dan has worked on issues related to Latin America and the Caribbean for over 15 years. He is a first-generation American of Colombian and Spanish descent. He served in the House Foreign Affairs Committee under Representative Lee Hamilton, former director of the Wilson Center. And prior to joining the Obama administration, he founded and directed the Americas Project at the Center for American Progress. Prior to that, he worked as an associate for the law firm Williams and Connolly, and also worked for the Florida Democratic Party during the 2000 election recount. Valenzuela, as I mentioned, is Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere. Previously, and I think many of us have known him for decades, as Professor of Government and Director of Latin American Studies at the Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. He is one of the region's and certainly the United States' foremost experts on questions of democratic governance and democratic consolidation, U.S.-Latin American relations, and Latin American politics. Prior to joining the faculty at Georgetown University, he was the director of the Council on Latin American Studies at Duke University. We have a short amount of time, so we'll invite Dan and Arturo to make brief opening statements, and then we'll open the floor to your questions. This session is on the record. We are being webcast, and so we welcome all of you who have joined us for this session. Dan.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Paulo, and to the Woodrow Wilson Center. And thank all of you for being here today. I'm just going to briefly kind of give an overview of the President's upcoming trip to Brazil, Chile, and El Salvador, and put it in a little bit of context for you. This is part of the kind of sustained high-level engagement that we've been undertaking since the very early days, the earliest days of President Obama's first term in office. Within the first 100 days, he traveled to first Mexico and then the Summit of the Americas, and since then has had numerous interactions with leaders from throughout the region, both in multilateral fora, be it at the United Nations or at the G20 or at APEC, and also had a number of, I think, double-digit number of visitors to the White House for bilateral meetings to discuss the issues of the day. This provides him an opportunity to get to South America for the first time and Central America for the first time, to underscore the manner in which he wishes to and has been, and the administration has been engaged with the Americas, and Americas that has been profoundly transformed in recent years. One that is economically ascendant, particularly in South America, one whose, although the challenges remain, who have models of successful democratic transitions that are pertinent to events unfolding elsewhere in the world today. These Americas provide a ready, willing, and able set of partners to work on the issues, the central issues facing folks throughout the Americas, and quite frankly, to deal with global challenges and opportunities. I think you'll see that in the his interactions in all three countries with a set of pragmatic political leaders in each country, relatively new to office, all three of them. The first, President Rousseff, obviously being the most recent to office, being the end of her first quarter in office. All three countries who have indicated, and all three leaders who have indicated a desire to deepen what are already strong relationships between the United States and their countries, to focus on, in the case of Brazil, I think our discussions will focus on a broad set of global issues, how the United States and Brazil can be partners in addressing development issues in the Americas and in other parts of the world, how we can become stronger and deeper energy partners across a broad range of the energy matrix, how we can advance cooperation in the context of the G20, and advance the Doha development round at the WTO. Brazil is a country who's very much a global player, who is benefiting from the emerging global architecture that President Obama has embraced, of making the G20 the preeminent economic and global financial forum, having become the 10th largest shareholder at the IMF. There are also a basket of regional issues that we are sure to discuss, that the two presidents are sure to discuss, and the economic and commercial aspects of our bilateral relationship and the real opportunities that come that present themselves both from the significant investments Brazil is expected to make over the course of the next several years in anticipation of major global sporting events, and also to sustain and build upon the economic momentum that it has generated over the course of the past decade. Moving on to Chile, you have, both in Chile and Brazil, you have robust examples of successful democratic transitions, and I think one of the things you'll see are the lessons to be learned and drawn from that as they apply to other parts of the world. Underscoring, and something that will be underscored throughout this visit, is that the Americas are very much part of the world, and the President sees them very much as part of the world, not a neighborhood set apart, but rather integral members in the global community who provide ample partnership opportunities to work on global issues. In the case of Chile, I think we see the opportunities and have had a robust relationship with regard to disaster response, which is, again, a timely issue today, given the gravity of the circumstances we're seeing unfolding in Japan. Chile obviously suffered from a severe earthquake a little more than a year ago. We have had and will continue to develop a deep relationship between the disaster response capabilities and departments and agencies in each country. I think you will also see as energy being a theme throughout the visits in Chile. Obviously, they are becoming a regional leader in solar and other forms of renewable based on the unique geography of their country. Santiago will also provide the President an opportunity to give a speech about policy toward the region writ large, describing the efforts we have engaged in to date and those that we will continue to engage in as partners on various sets of issues, be it citizen security, be it energy and climate through the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas, be it enhancing economic and social inclusion through multiple sets of flexible partnerships, be it Pathways to Prosperity and others. The importance of emphasizing and working more effectively on education and educational exchanges in the Americas. And carrying on over, so as to leave time here for Arturo and some questions, in El Salvador, I think you'll see with President Funes, with whom the President met last March here in Washington, the opportunity to engage on the issues most pertinent to the realities in El Salvador and throughout Central America and in many parts of the Americas, of finding ways to unlock sustainable economic growth and to address the real challenges of citizen security. Throughout this, the President will be emphasizing the actions that we are taking here at home to fulfill our responsibilities with regard to the illegal flows that go from north to south in the Americas that are part of these transnational networks, and also moving towards new partnerships and flexible partnerships as a number of countries become engaged with one another. So it's not just the United States, but rather an effort to coordinate and better engage and better utilize resources from various countries and the experiences from various countries. Obviously, the issues of immigration will be undoubtedly part of the discussion in El Salvador, as they were when President Funes visited the president last year. And these are all related issues, of course, as President Funes has pointed out on a number of occasions, as other leaders, President Calderon and others have pointed out in their discussions with the president and their public comments after discussions with the president, the importance of robust economic activity in countries throughout the region to create the economic opportunities for folks to live out their dreams in their countries of birth. I think that will be also part of the discussion between the two presidents in El Salvador. So with that as a broad brush overview, I will turn it over to my friend and colleague Arturo Valenzuela, and then we'll get to some questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. I'll be very brief. The United States has vital interest in the success of the countries of the Americas. In some ways, that's the starting point. The second starting point is that this is a continent that's been remarkably transformed. We're celebrating this year the 50th anniversary of the Alliance for Progress, but the world is a very different one for the countries of the hemisphere than when President Kennedy proposed the Alliance for Progress. In that sense, you heard, Dan, I don't know how many times you mentioned the word partnership, but you said it quite a few times. And that's really what I also want to underscore, that in this current climate, and in this day and age, the relationship between the United States and Latin America is a different one. In large measure because Latin America is also very, very different, and we have an extraordinary set of developments that have taken place. Any of us you mentioned, unfortunately, the decades that some of us have been following Latin America, but it's true. But it really wasn't that long ago that most of the countries were under authoritarian regimes, some that lasted a long time, that we had civil wars in Central America. We had the lost decade of the 1980s with the economic crisis, the debt crisis at the time. And you fast forward to currently today, you see economies that are dynamic, that are globalized, that are embedded in a highly globalized international system, and are being much more successful than they were in the past. In that sense, we approach, and the president approaches this continent not in the way that we might have in the past, where what kind of assistance can we provide, but rather how can we better engage in order to be genuine partners, to be able to meet our objectives, and that is to improve the lives of our peoples, and that's essentially the fundamental objective in this. And Dan mentioned a few things. One of the paradigm shifts is that many of our conversations are going to be about trilateral cooperation. This is not just about what kind of assistance can we provide, but how can we work with others. How can we work with the Brazilians to do trilateral cooperation with other countries, as we do indeed with Haiti, but also in other areas, in biofuels with the Caribbean countries, and indeed with Brazil even beyond the Americas, or how with the Chileans can we strengthen some of the trilateral partnerships that we have to work jointly in other countries like Paraguay or Central America and things like that. So this is really about how do we get together on the fundamental core elements that we're interested in, whether it's social exclusion, whether it's climate change, whether it's alternative energies and so on, whether it's, as Dan mentioned, disaster relief, and how can we better prepare for that. All of these things are important. But let me just end by saying that perhaps the single most important in many ways, if you pick up what our colleagues are telling us, they really want to become more competitive in the world economy. And so if there's an important part of there are many different dimensions to our relationship, but if there's one important part is the desire to have a better dialogue on such things as technology, innovation, education, and change. Latin American countries realize that in order to be successful in the 21st century, they're really going to have to increase their level of competitiveness. And this means their capacity to invest better in human capital. And this is one of the very important parts of our dialogue as well. So I'll just stop with that. Thanks.
Well, let's try to do the questions like in order of the visit, at least 2 or 3 rotations, Brazil, Chile, El Salvador, so we cover. On Brazil, I see Andrea Murta from Folha de São Paulo. Chile.
Hi, thank you for doing this. For Mr. Restrepo first, when you say that you are looking for more trilateral cooperation, like Valenzuela just said, with Brazil, the United States has not exactly been very welcoming to some of the initiatives that Brazil has had in the global stage in the past 2 years. The Middle East and Iran are just a couple of them. Do you think that this trip is going to mark a shift in that, the attitude of the United States towards Brazil in its attempts to be a global actor?
I think we see very real possibilities with the Rousseff administration of working well together on a broad range of global issues, hemispheric issues and bilateral issues. So we, I think, based on a number of public statements from both governments, I think you see a real disposition to move forward together to do what we can as partners to advance global peace and security. So that is very much part of the agenda for the President, and we expect and anticipate that the possibility that we are, as the expression goes, we have a willing partner to work on development issues, on climate and energy issues, on a whole range of issues in our relationship and our relationship together with other parts of the world and with pressing issues on today's global agenda.
A question on Chile, please. Who would like to ask a question on Chile? Sir. Oops, sorry. I'll get you.
Sorry. Well, my name is Richard Dawson of Dawson Associates International, Inc. My question about Chile is that Chile being part of the Southern Cone and not really having strong problems in the relations in the Western Hemisphere. What surprises us, at least a group of analysts, is that why in this opportunity President Obama has not visited Colombia, that is our greatest ally against the fight of narco-trafficking and terrorism, maybe because of the reapproachment to Venezuela that we have been observing in the last weeks. Anyhow, that's my question related to Chile. Why Chile, not Colombia?
That's fascinating. A question of
That's
what?
a good one.
Yes.
Like
There are any number of countries that we could have chosen from to visit. On the specific question of why not Colombia, which I believe is what your question actually was.
No, it was on Chile.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Why Chile and not Colombia, or why not Colombia but Chile? In all seriousness, the president and this administration have been very clear that and very supportive when President Obama and President Santos met on the margins of the UN General Assembly in September of the diplomatic efforts of the government of Colombia and President Santos to reach out to their neighbors. That is not an issue of concern for President Obama or his administration. The Colombia, as you well know, will host the 2012 Summit of the Americas. We fully anticipate the President to participate in that, and with the heightened demand for the President of the United States and countries throughout the Americas, repeating the same country in 2 years, back-to-back years, struck us as it may make more sense to go to other places. But Chile in particular, it is a country that is globally interconnected, particularly commercially. It is one that has, over the course of the past 20 years, undergone a dramatic, profound, and positive democratic transition. Fully consolidated democratic transition. and it shows the advantages of global interconnectivity for the Americas today. So I think Chile was a very logical choice, and also given the deep ties between the United States and Chile. And at the end of the day, the president can't go to all of the countries who wanted him to come on this particular visit, and undoubtedly he will travel again to the region and go to a different set of countries the next time he travels.
Yeah, and if I could just underscore one thing, that is that each of the countries that the president is going to are countries that have gone through extraordinary transformations, not only in terms of their economies and societies, but also in terms of consolidating democratic institutions, to repeat that again. In the case of Chile, we have a situation where you have had an election that's displaced a coalition of the center-left by a coalition of the center-right, and in Salvador it's the opposite. It's a coalition of the center-left that's replaced a coalition of the center-right. And in some ways, these are all countries that are emblematic of efforts to try to construct, robust democratic institutions as they address at the same time some of the real significant opportunities as well as challenges that they face.
Is there a question about El Salvador that does not relate to another country? Like El Salvador, remember where it is? El Salvador? No questions. So we now... Okay, Sonia, go. It's close enough. Go.
This is about Salvador, is that right?
Close to. Thank you, Sonia Shatglo, Vision Venezuela. It was a perception that Latin America, from the U.S. point of view, was divided into the countries which are more likely to work together with the U.S. and those who are more anti-Americanist. I would like to know what is the strategy from this administration, not just only to face or to work together with those countries who are willing to work with the U.S., but for those who are not that close to the U.S., like Venezuela. Thank you.
I think one of the things that you will see, and it is evident in the region, but the president's travels to the region will underscore, is that he has, and his policies and his administration's work have done a tremendous amount to restore the image of the United States throughout the Americas. All of kind of the available numbers support that. That has shrunk the space of those whose agendas are focused on anti-American set of policies. I think that will be evident that you have a president of the United States, as he laid down at the Summit of the Americas and as we've been working ever since, who is very interested in working to address the challenges that face the people of the Americas on a constructive basis with countries throughout the region. We are visiting 3 very constructive partners who are similarly oriented to, under pragmatic leadership, focused on the challenges and opportunities before their countries today. That is the North Star of our approach to the region. That will be on display during this trip, and it has been on display throughout all of our interactions to date, and will continue to be. This is a president who wants to advance U.S. interests, obviously, in the Americas, but understands the most effective means of doing that is working with constructive partners to address the challenges and seize the opportunities that are present before a region that, for the most part, is advancing by leaps and bounds.
If I could add just simply, I just want to mention the numbers just very, very briefly. No, it really what is really rather dramatic is if you look at some of the Latino Barometro polling that came out just a few weeks ago. The approval ratings for U.S. policy in the world, foreign policy in the world, are above 70% in country after country after country, in all countries of the region. In fact, in no country does it go below even 50%. And in most cases, these are improvements of 10 to 20% over the comparable figures for 2008. And the President of the United States has levels of approval that are just stratospheric in country after country after country. So really there's a very strong, different perception of the President and of the United States policy in the world in Latin America. Let me just conclude by reiterating in a different way what Dan says, is we see much less polarization and much more willingness to come to consensus in the Americas than we did earlier.
Luis Fernando, Globo Television.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to ask Mr. Restrepo, Mr. Valenzuela, what is your understanding of the expectations you think the Brazilian government, the Brazilian economic community, and the Brazilian society have of this visit, and where do you think that the Brazilian expectations will be met and where they won't be met?
I am certainly not going to speak on behalf of the Brazilian government. It does so very capably on its own. I didn't ask if you should speak for them. I just want your perception. I know you cannot speak for Brazilians or Brazilian government. I think there is a generalized expectation for this trip, and certainly on the President's behalf and on this administration's behalf, that there is a real opportunity to deepen a bilateral relationship to benefit both of our countries at all strata of society in both of our countries. That is very much President Obama's focus, going to Brazil to engage with President Rousseff to better define how the U.S. and Brazil can work as global partners and can work as hemispheric partners and can work as bilateral partners to enhance the economic well-being of both countries, to enhance global peace and security, to enhance the safety and security of all of our citizens in our respective countries and throughout the hemisphere. So I think there is generally a very positive expectation on behalf of President Obama and the U.S. Administration and this country about the possibilities of a new, stronger, deeper relationship between the U.S. and Brazil.
Peter.
Peter Kornblum, National Security Archive. A question for Assistant Secretary Valenzuela. The U.S. Embassy in Santiago has told the press that human rights is on the agenda for the President's visit. It's obviously a broad agenda, but that human rights is on it. And I'm wondering what that means. Does that mean that the President might pay a quick visit to the Museum of Human Rights and Memory? Does it mean that he might raise the issue of the one disappeared U.S. citizen, Boris Weisfeiler, with President Piñera, and the cases of two other Americans, Charles Horman and Frank Tarucci, who were killed? Does it mean he might offer support in terms of documents for some of the outstanding cases that are still being investigated from the Pinochet era?
Well, I'll let Dan answer the question in terms of what's being looked at in terms of the visit right now, and with the proviso that these things are still moving, as Dan is aware of, so that the logistics of it are. But yes, certainly, the visit to Chile is a visit in which the President will be engaging with the President of Chile, but also with members of the opposition, with people who represent those forces in the Chilean society that did oppose the dictatorship in the past, and I think in this discussion, we certainly anticipate that issues of human rights and the issues of democracy are going to be at important parts of our engagement. This is not just about commercial opportunities, but it's also about how we advance mutual values and mutual interests, and democracy and human rights are at the cornerstone of our foreign policy.
Is that it? Okay.
Pablo Sánchez de Univisión. Muchos de los cínicos dicen que el viaje a El Salvador, la parte de El Salvador es simbolismo, que la verdadera razón es el poderío económico de Brasil y Chile y que se está desplazando hacia los tigres asiáticos y hacia Europa, y el presidente necesita consolidar esas relaciones.
La razón por la cual estamos yendo a El Salvador es que es una muy importante relación para nosotros y eso es evidente en la reunión que tuvo el presidente Obama con el presidente Funes hace un año aquí en Washington. El Salvador es una parte clave en el éxito de Centroamérica y en El Salvador tenemos un presidente, o tienen un presidente que está enfocado en cómo mejorar la vida diaria de los salvadoreños y nosotros y el presidente Obama va a El Salvador en parte para ver cómo podemos nosotros, como socio, trabajar sobre ese asunto, sobre esos asuntos, para enfrentar los retos que existen en El Salvador. Y también, mira, hay enlaces enormes, profundos, entre los Estados Unidos y El Salvador. Familias que viven en ambos países. Y esa conexión es emblemática de la conexión que los Estados Unidos tiene porque nosotros formamos parte de las Américas. Las Américas es nuestra casa. Y la visita a El Salvador subraya eso, la visita a los tres países subraya eso, pero en particular con el vínculo tan estrecho que existe con El Salvador al nivel familiar, personal, lo enfatiza aún más.
Alex Ribeiro from Valor Econômico, Brazil.
Hi. What do you expect from Brazil on Doha round? Do you expect more in terms of opening up markets from Brazil when you compare to the first draft of the Doha round negotiations?
I think the key here is we would like to move forward consistent with the conclusions out of the G20 meeting in Seoul and its consensus to negotiators to enhance the negotiations and to pick up the rhythm of negotiation across the board to reach a more robust conclusion and successful conclusion of the Doha Development Round. I think that'll be part of the discussion between the two presidents. Again, in the context of a very broad agenda, but how we can move forward on Doha more effectively is certainly part of the discussion that we anticipate having this weekend and in the weeks and months to follow.
Cindy, would like to get one of the questions from the overflow, or?
Well, let's see. The questions on the overflow pertain to Brazil, so I think let's move on and see if there's another question about El Salvador, Chile.
Gracias, Julio Marenco. Ya que nos pasamos a hablar en español, hablando no solo con El Salvador, sino con toda la región, un tema sumamente importante es el migratorio, especialmente para El Salvador, un país que depende hasta un 18% en algunos años de la economía de las remesas que los salvadoreños envían de regreso a su país. Obviamente, el presidente Funes dijo una vez que el tsunami salvadoreño sería una deportación masiva de parte de los Estados Unidos. El gobierno salvadoreño desde hace un buen tiempo está buscando una situación permanente para cerca de 250,000 salvadoreños que están amparados al estatus de protección temporal. ¿Se podría esperar algún anuncio en eso en específico o más grande en cuanto al tema migratorio en general?
Mira, el presidente Obama ha dejado bien claro su compromiso total para avanzar una reforma de nuestro sistema migratorio integral. Él está buscando el apoyo republicano y demócrata en nuestro Congreso para hacer eso una realidad. Eso es su compromiso y seguirá haciéndolo. Él ha trabajado esto desde su primer día como presidente. Ha sido parte de sus conversaciones y discusiones con el presidente Funes, con otros presidentes de la región, porque entendemos el impacto que tiene también fuera de los Estados Unidos. Y eso obviamente será parte de la conversación que tendrán los dos presidentes la semana que viene. Como han dicho varios presidentes de la región, esto también que el crecimiento económico doméstico en los países de la región también es una parte clave de esta dinámica y nosotros estamos dispuestos a trabajar en El Salvador y en otros países para ver cómo podemos mejor arrancar el crecimiento sostenible económico para crear una situación donde no hay tanta presión sobre nuestro sistema migratorio que no funciona ahora, que tiene que arreglarse. El compromiso del presidente Obama es arreglar eso con la ayuda republicana y demócrata en nuestro Congreso.
Sí, yo quisiera subrayar solamente un punto para repetir que la conversación en estos temas es una conversación integral, donde se entiende que las presiones, por ejemplo, migratorias que tiene El Salvador están relacionadas también a la falta de capacidad que tiene El Salvador de generar trabajos. En ese sentido, el esfuerzo por parte del gobierno de los Estados Unidos, por ejemplo, con unos programas bastante puntuales, va a ser de ir viendo cómo se puede identificar aquellos escollos, por ejemplo, al crecimiento en El Salvador, y ver cómo se pueden generar una dinámica distinta para poder incentivar un desarrollo que no dependa solamente de las remesas.
Grasping with the gross human rights violations committed during the dictatorships has been...
Who are you?
My name is Viviana Kristisevich. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Justice and International Law, a regional human rights organization. So grasping with the human rights issues of the past human rights violations committed during the dictatorships has been a major underpinning of the consolidation of democracies in the region. Brazil has been lagging in that regard. However, under President Lula, there were discussions of giving way to a truth commission, and there are currently discussions and movements on trying to find ways for truth and accountability in Brazil. And we were wondering whether those specific human rights issues were part of the agenda, and whether you had thought of a fast declassification process of the information that you might have that could support those goals of the government. Thank you.
Well, look, these are issues that are being discussed in many different countries as they look to try to see how they, in fact, deal with the question of memory. And you see experiences in different places to develop human rights truth commissions. Peter Kornbluh mentioned Chile earlier. Chile, of course, is a country that has an example of that. The Argentines have done the same. These are things for the individual countries to work on, and they can draw on experiences from other countries as well. Certainly, to repeat what I said earlier, in our own dialogue, we do emphasize the importance of human rights. And of democratic institutions, free press, and things like that. And that's because those are core values of our foreign policy.
Just before moving to the overflow room, you want to say something on it? Wednesday, 1 week from today, in this room at 1:15, we will have a discussion on the Truth Commission, proposed creation of Truth Commission in Brazil with two former national secretaries of human rights from the governments of President Cardoso and President Lula, so you are all invited. Cindy.
Sure. There are a couple of interesting questions from the overflow rooms that are cross-cutting, so I'll just put them out there. Two of them are related. One from Mr. Yonayama from Mitsui. Is the Chinese presence in Latin America a hidden agenda of the trip? And related to that, from Sarah Mercado at the State Department, Brazil is increasingly concerned about China and its management of the yuan. How might the U.S. and Brazil work together as partners on this issue? Related to the international relations theme, what about the recent moves among South American countries to recognize the state of Palestine? And then finally, a question from Richard Downey at the Center for Hemispheric Defense Studies. In El Salvador, will there be a move to unite the Merida initiative with El Salvador and the other Central American countries? I think some of this is already underway with CARSI. So there's a couple of questions there, broadly.
All right. Well, let me start at the back end. In terms of citizen security efforts, I think you've seen the evolution under President Obama of our citizen security efforts, and they're deepening. In addition to Merida, to CARSI, the Central American Regional Security Initiative, the launching of CBSI, the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, at the Summit of the Americas in Trinidad. One of the issues that occupies a significant amount of time throughout the government is making sure that those efforts are not creating seams. and ensuring that those efforts are working well together, that the regions are working well together, because the challenges posed by transnational criminal organizations don't respect borders, they don't respect sub-regional groupings, they cut across, they're fluid, they're dynamic. We need to be as well. And we work every day to make sure that our efforts to support citizen security throughout the region is done so in as comprehensive a fashion, and comprehensive in two ways. One, in regard to these, making sure we don't have false geographic divides between our efforts. And second, comprehensive to understand that promoting citizen security runs a gamut of activities, from enhancing the professionalism and capabilities of security forces and police forces, to judges, defense attorneys, prosecutors, penal institutions, but into how we can be an effective partner in creating resilient societies, right into sustainable economic growth, because as a whole, those are the issues that constitute citizen security. So comprehensive across sub-regional lines, and comprehensive across the full range of issues necessary to advance citizen security. On China, I don't think it's a hidden agenda. There is no hidden agenda to this trip. We recognize the need to compete in the Americas. It's the reason that this president has been as engaged as he has been. Is engagement that's underscored by this trip. We have real advantages, if you will, in terms of the geographic and historic connections and ties in the region, but we also understand that we can't simply sit back and expect those to deliver without work from the United States and work with our partners. We very much see the economic opportunity and commercial opportunities in the Americas, and that is one of the reasons the president is traveling, and why those issues will be at the top of his agendas in his interactions. And it's not just something that the U.S. wants to do. This is something that our partners in these three countries and other countries in the Americas wish to do, which is recognizing the affinity that exists within our populations, and again, the geography and the historic ties of how can we as a region, utilize and leverage those to be more competitive in the global economy.
Yes, if I could just add a couple points on this with regard to China. We certainly welcome the global engagement of the countries of the Americas, because this will help strengthen their economies. 60% of all exports from Latin America to China go from Chile and from Brazil, and those are primarily copper, iron ore, and soy, and that in turn generates revenues for Latin American countries to buy Caterpillars and airplanes and so on in the United States. So we encourage the development of international trade. I think this is a very positive phenomena. But we also see the great and important opportunities that a continent of 580 million people has for the United States. 43% of all global exports from the United States go to the Western Hemisphere. 37% of all investment from the United States goes to the Western Hemisphere. So this is certainly something we want to pay attention to. Let me just briefly say on the Central American security initiatives, Caribbean, and so on, that our partnership goes beyond the partnerships with countries in the Americas to partnerships with other countries that are also concerned about issues of security. And I'm referring here to the European Union, to the Canadians, to the Spaniards, and to many others, including the Colombians and the Mexicans that have been working, and the Chileans and others who have been working very significantly to try to add value to the support that is being given to Central American countries in this respect. So this is really, it's all about global partnerships as well as regional partnerships. And then finally, on Palestine, if we're serious in supporting, as we are, the two-state solution, that's something that the two parties need to be able to deal with and they need to be able to engage on. Thanks.
Fernando from Global.
There are big expectations in Brazil concerning what President Obama you say about Brazil's request for a permanent seat in the Security Council in the United Nations. It seems that, as you have been hearing from official seniors, that in the hearings, in the briefings, that it to be more a large declaration that President Obama is not going to use the same words he did it in India last year, and he clearly support India for this similar request. And why not? He's not going to do the same thing in Brazil this time.
I've worked for presidents long enough to know that I should allow them to speak on their own behalf, and will do so on the specific matter that you've raised. I think it's important to understand that, and undoubtedly this is an issue that the two presidents will discuss. As a general matter, as I believe I said earlier here, President Obama has embraced a global architecture that is reflective of global realities, and the transformation of global architecture to reflect global realities in the economic space, as I mentioned, the G20, the IMF. We understand Brazil's aspirations, and this issue will undoubtedly be one that gets discussed between the presidents and between our governments moving forward. This is a moment in time where the two presidents will meet this Saturday, but it is certainly not the end of any conversation on the topics that will be discussed between them in Brasilia.
Rodrigo Valderrama, Plantation International. Can you specify any specific commercial agreements that will be signed? Any fighter plane agreements with Brazil, or anything, or any other like sustainable development agreements?
First delivery.
Unless you had a piece of news there, I think the important way to think about the agreements that will be connected with this visit, particularly with regard to Brazil, is that I think you'll set in motion a number of foundations to build that deeper economic and commercial relationship that is in the interest of both countries. And I think that'll be clearly reflected, again, I'm not going to get too far out in front of the President, clearly reflected in both the items discussed and the outputs from the preparations for this trip. This is in some contrast to I guess the President's most recent trip abroad. There isn't the expectation of a large number of multi-billion-dollar deals being announced in the context of this visit.
One last question on Chile. Is there one? On Chile? El Salvador? About everything? Okay, that's a good question.
All right.
Everything. Get ready.
Y la voy a hacer en español. Soy Lina Correa de La Voz de América. Primero que todo, quiero insistir un poco, y perdonen que sea reiterativa, en la pregunta de Pablo, en el hecho de que cuánto peso tuvo en la decisión del presidente de viajar, especialmente a Brasil y a Chile, el hecho de que, por ejemplo, Estados Unidos haya perdido el primer puesto de socio comercial con un país como Brasil. Y la segunda pregunta tiene que ver con qué peso va a tener en la agenda entre Brasil y Estados Unidos la posición que ha asumido Brasil en los últimos meses, de pronto el último año, sobre el programa nuclear iraní, qué tanto depende el desarrollo de toda la gran agenda que tienen sobre otros temas, este tema específico del programa nuclear iraní. Gracias.
Mira, con respecto a el tema de Irán y Brasil, hemos visto con la presidenta de Brasil una disposición de comentarios públicos antes de tomar la toma de posesión y después de su preocupación, una preocupación compartida por muchos en la comunidad internacional, incluso el presidente Obama, sobre la situación de derechos humanos en Irán. Creo que ese tema obviamente es uno de los temas que se va a manejar durante la conversación entre los dos presidentes. El tema también, y también Brasil ha hecho, como casi todos en la comunidad internacional, de reforzar las sanciones de las Naciones Unidas a través de la resolución 1929, porque la preocupación compartida en el mundo y por el presidente Obama de los deseos nucleares de Irán. Es un tema central de la política global en este momento. Y obviamente los temas centrales globales se van a tratar en la reunión entre los dos presidentes el 19 de este mes. La primera pregunta con respecto a si esto es la motivación de este viaje, creo que es bien claro. La motivación de este viaje es para subrayar la importancia de las Américas para los Estados Unidos y para el presidente Obama. Han sido, son y serán importantes. Las Américas son nuestra casa, son donde vivimos, y las conexiones son conexiones muy positivas para nosotros y para los países de la región, y queremos trabajar para profundizar esas conexiones. Esa, al fin y al cabo, es la razón principal de este viaje, y creo que escoger los países que han tenido tanto éxito como Brasil, como Chile, un país que tiene tanta conexión con los Estados Unidos como El Salvador, es un buen ejemplar de las posibilidades de la relación interamericana en el siglo XXI. Entonces, eso es la razón por la cual el presidente Obama en este momento está viajando a estos países.
Denise Crispin from o Estado de São Paulo, she says that she has...
I think we're going to lose Dan. So,
Yeah, we're losing both of us.
so perhaps what we could do
Both
is
of us. So, now
welcome
let's-
them back. Is welcome them back after the trip, perhaps, for another session to discuss what actually
Yes.
took place and what took
Time
place
is
both
up.
in public and private. Please join us in thanking Dan and Arturo for their time.